Hi, and welcome to Module 8, Overview Hebrew Scriptures. First, let me say I am so disappointed that we are not going to be able to have this last class together. There's been an unexpected family situation that's come up that requires my flying to the East Coast and being with my relatives, which is a good thing for me to be able to be there. Just unfortunate that we aren't going to be able to have this last session together live. Also, I would like to say that in the past there have been times where the audio and visual get disconnected, and I am not tech savvy enough to know how to correct that situation. I apologize in advance if that happens with this video, so hopefully you can hang in there, or at the very least maybe simply listen to it if it's too distracting to have my mouth and the sound coming out differently. Wow, what a journey it has been, and literally this is an overview class. We, are in such a high-fly mode in looking at this compilation of writings known as the Hebrew Scriptures. And we've worked our way, of course, if we've already talked about through the Torah, the law, we've worked our way through the prophets. Last week we began with the section known as the writings, the Ketuvim, and we looked at some of the wisdom writings from last week. We looked at some of the wisdom writings, and tonight we are finishing up with that miscellaneous collection that are considered part of that section. I want to talk a little bit about the different books mentioned in the syllabus related to part 2 of the writings, just again to give some context on them and some commentary around them. I'll begin with probably one of the juiciest that we can have in the canon, the Song of Solomon. Now, in an interest of spiritualizing it, Song of Solomon is often taught as a religious poem, as a dedication to the divine. Absolutely, it is a way that we can look at it. It fits nicely in that characterization, and however, it really is truly, as you see it and read it, it is a love song between two individuals with quite erotic and provocative language that is intended to convey the fullness of the human experience in physical love, especially physical love. So, people sometimes wonder, how did it end up in the canon? I think, once again, for me, when you stand back and look at the Bible as a whole, for it to have the type of inclusion that it does, I think it speaks well of the desire to include, a variety of perspectives and material in what became the sacred texts for the ancient Israelites. And there is definitely this celebration, of love between two people. So those are, what my comments around Song of Solomon. Daniel is a writing that is considered apocalyptic, as well as far as a literary genre. It is out of the apocalyptic literature, and in that respect it is similar to Revelation, because Revelation is also apocalyptic in its nature. So, talking about great upheaval and distressing times. Daniel has also been considered a book by many, and including myself, of hope and encouragement. There are some wonderful stories in there, not the least of which about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which is, for me, nothing more than I just love saying Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but a wonderful story of, standing in one's integrity in the face of complete opposition. Okay, and certainly the story of Daniel and the lion's den, another one that we are very familiar with. And in this way, the book talks about hope and encouragement, perseverance in spite of, which again is a theme that we've seen repeatedly through the Hebrew Bible, but in a very provocative storytelling way in the book of Daniel. And also the idea of Daniel as an interpreter of dreams. And once again, we find one of Jewish descent in a position of authority under a foreign ruler. So it's interesting how these motifs continue to reappear, throughout the Hebrew scriptures, and how the Jews, or the Israelites and the Jews, have been promoted in, like I said, in positions of power, to kings of foreign rule, is part of that kind of juxtaposition and tension between the Israelites and surrounding cultures, and yet continuing to place the Israelites in a position of importance. Okay, so recognizing them as God's people. So those are the comments that I want to make around Daniel. I would like to touch on Ruth and then Esther before going to Chronicles and Ezra and Nehemiah. Ruth is again another wonderful story that she accompanies her mother-in-law Naomi to return to dwell among the Hebrews, even though Ruth is not an Israelite. She marries Boaz. She and Boaz conceive Obed, O-B-E-D, and Obed is the grandfather of King David. So Ruth and Boaz are David's great-grandparents, and so we see a situation where we have a non-Israelite, married to an Israelite, giving birth to what eventually leads to the line of King David. And then, when you look into the Christian scriptures, for those who are pro-monarchy, and that the covenant that God makes with David is going to be the reestablishment of a king, a ruler that is going to come out of the Davidic line, and that gets applied in Jesus. But what is also important to recognize about the story of Ruth is that it is a story of intermarriage, which in the post-exile time, we had, as we've talked about before, an extended period during the Babylonian exile where, where the culture and the identity was largely decimated. And then in trying to find their way back, we have issues around intermarriage and people who built their lives outside of the Jewish homeland, and in some cases are returning and trying to find ways to reintegrate. And you have those who see the people who participated in intermarriage as not being truly Jewish, so a lot of difficulties there, which is highlighted in Ezra and Nehemiah, which I'll get to in just a couple of minutes. There's a lot there about the reestablishment of the identity of the Israelites, and therefore there were decrees against intermarriage. So the insertion of the story of Ruth, and then ultimately of them being the King David being part of their progeny, is a story that is an insertion of how Yahweh in and of itself didn't prohibit that type of intermarriage. So at least in the context of the story of Ruth, it's okay, for this to happen. So the story in part is a story in support or in defense of intermarriage. Aside from being just a wonderful story, how many of us have, where thou goest, I will go as too, and how beautiful that is. So, piece there about Ruth. Esther is a completely fictionalized story. It is it's a novella. Wonderful, once again, a Jewish person granted identity hidden, but a Jewish person, a Jewish woman, is placed in a position of authority. There's the queen to the king of Persia, as the story is being told, again, fictionalized. However, in that story, we see the demonstration once again of the tensions that are going on between the Jews and, in this case, the Persians. There's plots for, killing the Jews, which get overturned in part because of Esther's willingness to, risk her own life to go to the king in defense of the Jews. And so there's this, again, a reversal in the story of Haman actually being the one who is killed, is murdered, put to death, and Mordecai and the Jews end up triumphing. So, once again, we see a tribute to Jewish nationalism and Jewish identity through the story, and the fact that we are able to fool, those that think they have it on us, using my paraphrase. Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah. There has been for a period of time belief that the same individual authored all three books. That is largely now been separated, believing that while there are similarities in perspective between Chronicles and Ezra and Nehemiah, that in fact they are written by two different individuals. What we get in Chronicles is largely through the priestly perspective. So it's priestly friendly. It is also a pro-monarchy set of writings, and fully incorporates the idea that Israel has been punished for its wrongdoings, which again holds very closely with a priestly perspective. But what Chronicles is also about, in terms of giving like an overarching view from Adam through till the post-exile time, is there is the development of the solidarity of the Jewish identity. And we can really never get away from this, because it is so central to what's going on in the Hebrew Bible as early, really with Exodus on out. And we can even go earlier to Abraham, but, we certainly see it from Exodus on out as you move into the Promised Land. And, what does it mean to be these, to be a set of to be a people, a nation under Yahweh. So we certainly get this solidarity again with Jewish identity, which is a theme carrying through with Ezra, Nehemiah. I believe I mentioned in one of our previous classes that Nehemiah is one of the most fantastic books, as far as I'm concerned, about bringing people together for a common cause. In this case, the rebuilding of the temple, although much more modest in size. It is about reestablishing a central location for worship, which has become very much the core of Judaism, is worship in the temple. And across the whole span of the Hebrew Bible, and we've talked about this, is it social justice? Is it following the law? Where did the two overlap? How does this all come into play? And largely it is coalesced around the idea of temple worship, which, as we mentioned last week, we see that showing itself early in the Christian scriptures with Jesus and overturning the tables at the temple, and the distortions that have, that certainly crept into it. But regardless, coming back into Nehemiah, rebuilding the temple was essential. And this is about a reunification of those who were in exile and outside of the Jewish homeland, as well as those who were. And, so Nehemiah calls everyone to participate for the higher good. And it's a great story about bringing people together with disparate viewpoints, and again, finding a vision that will pull them. So to me, Ezra and Nehemiah are excellent sources of preaching, around how to bring together disparate groups and have them working toward a common goal. So this is, again, just sort of is with everything, a very, very broad overview of the books that are part of this last piece of what we're looking at in the writings. And as of last night, I know we talked about you looking at some specific books. Hopefully you will still do that. Obviously this lecture is going to take the place of class, and so we won't have the opportunity to be able to interact in the way that we would have otherwise. However, hopefully again that won't dissuade you from continuing your study and becoming familiar, at least in general, with the content of these particular books. In the syllabus, the last piece that we would have been looking at in Collaborate is, has your understanding or opinion of the Hebrew Scriptures changed over the last 8 weeks? And what would you tell a friend if they asked you what you learned? And I encourage you to reflect on that. And I'd like to see you respond to it in the discussion board, okay, since we're not going to be able to have collaborate together, to respond to that in the discussion board in terms of, just a few sentences. It doesn't have to be extensive, but a few sentences of what's happened for you as it relates to the Hebrew Scriptures through this class and your understanding. Along with that is the actual prompt for the discussion board, which we will not be able to put into the session since we're not going to be meeting together, in terms of taking something that you've read out of one of the books included in the assigned reading: Song of Solomon, Ruth, Esther, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, Chronicles, an aspect, just one aspect of something that you read, and how you find that story, or perspective in your own consciousness, okay? And without going metaphysical, simply recognizing that this is a perennial story these are perennial stories of the human experience. Okay, so we're not looking for it in a metaphysical sense. What we're looking for is an identification with the scenario, with the feelings that are being expressed. Where do you have nationalism within you, for example, and where perhaps does nationalism become problematic as it relates to other individuals or not? Where is nationalism subjugated, for example, to perhaps a higher cause? Or where have you remained loyal to someone because they meant that much to you? Or where have you been able to stand in integrity despite overwhelming opposition, and not only maybe opposition, but just lack of support, kind of like being out there on a limb, so to speak. So some examples of how this is applicable without going metaphysical on it, okay? So I'm looking for you to, respond to both, incorporate something into your discussion about what's happened for you with the Hebrew Scriptures, as well as responding on an aspect of what you've read and where you recognize that within yourself. It's been, again, a pleasure to be with you in this journey of discovery as we've danced through the Hebrew Scriptures. And once again, I hope that what's happened out of the course has given you, maybe whet your appetite to be able to see the Hebrew Scriptures in a different way and continue to explore them in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead. So I thank you all so much for your participation, the way that you've shown up each week in class, the rich discussions that we have had, and I just wish you a wonderful rest of your afternoon or evening whenever you're listening to this, and blessings as you continue on in your spiritual growth as well. So, namaste.